You're listening to the Cinemental Podcast.
Shall we begin?
All right, welcome back to the Cinemental Podcast, where we discuss mental health themes from cinema, television, and popular culture. I'm Jeffrey Jones, and I'm a filmmaker and professor, and I'm joined, as always, by my brother, Dr. Joshua Jones, who, along with joining us directly from an intense weight workout fueled by several pounds of blueberries, is a general and forensic psychiatrist. Josh,
Jeff,
that's a deep cut. Are you trying to tell me that you're nauseous and you're going to throw up right now?
Jeff, the only way to really get swole is if you just pound several pounds of blueberries before going in, just working out. That is, that has always worked for me. You get your antioxidants and your protein, and definitely don't gross your brother out for the next 30 years.
Yeah, by throwing up on the sidewalk. Okay. Josh, today we're talking about Interstellar, and Interstellar is solidly in my top 5 favorite movies of all time. So I'm very, very excited to get into it. We want you to start your week off right with our podcast. So we drop a new episode every Monday morning at 9 a.m. Eastern. You can listen to us wherever you get your podcasts, or you can watch our hottest and spiciest clips and full episodes on YouTube. Interstellar follows a former pilot who leaves Earth to travel through a wormhole in search of a new home for humanity as our planet is dying. While he searches distant planets, time passes differently, and his daughter back on Earth grows up trying to solve the problem that could save everyone, only for them to ultimately help each other across time to ensure humanity's survival. There is a surprising amount, as we often say, of mental health stuff to talk about here. But there's also what I think is the most interesting with this movie are the moral conundrums. And I love that Christopher Nolan is very good at asking moral questions. And that's not necessarily mental health. I don't know that psychiatrists are any better at talking about moral philosophy than anybody else. But I think you and I have an interesting take on it, and we're going to talk about that today.
Jeff, that's actually a really good question. I agree with you. I don't think necessarily that psychiatrists are better equipped to talk about morals and ethics, about morals than anybody else. But interestingly enough, in the medical field, we are often tapped as the people to do that. Often really kind of inappropriately. We're viewed as kind of the liberal artists of the medical world, and so we get drawn into
You saying doctors
cases.
or psychiatrists?
Psychiatrists.
Okay, you said doctors.
Oh, sorry. We're kind of the liberal artists of physicians, and so we're often drawn into to try to get strong-armed into answering moral questions where we're like, no, we can help you navigate the ethical question, but the patient's morals and how they're viewed in context of the decision that needs to be made is really tricky, and we're not better equipped at it. However, that being said, I agree with you. This has a lot of moral issues that get brought up in Interstellar, and how we address those absolutely has a significant impact on our mental health.
100%. And I didn't mean for that to just sound, Josh, like, oh, the psychiatrist doesn't have any business talking about moral stuff. I don't think I do either. I don't think that I'm any better equipped than anybody else. The fun part about moral questions is that we can all engage in that conversation. We're all entitled to engage in that conversation. We all should engage in that conversation. And it's one of the reasons why I love Nolan movies so much, is because he asks really interesting questions, and then a lot of people go and see his movies. Oppenheimer is an incredible example of this, about something that happened in real life. Like, we really can look at the making of the bomb and decide together, like, was this a, moral action, or was this something that has damned humanity since? I was a philosophy major, so I love having the moral discussions. But I meant to say that neither of us are more inclined than anyone else to be experts at a moral conversation.
Although you do have a degree in philosophy, so one might say you actually are.
Fair. But yeah, you get 5 philosophers in a room, and we're going to have 5 different opinions on things. So,
or 7 or 8, actually.
Yeah, exactly. All right, but what are we going to talk about today, Josh? What are the topics we're going to talk about?
Okay, Jeff, alongside how having to make very difficult decisions that impact morals, impact people's mental health. We're also going to talk about something we don't discuss a lot on this show, and that is the neurobiology and psychology of love.
Oh, I love it.
I
love it.
One of the most omnipresent emotions, and perhaps one of the emotions that most defines us as a species, is something that we don't talk about scientifically enough. And I think Interstellar forces us to try to do that in the movie, but definitely will have you and I talking about some of the scientific underpinnings of love in this podcast.
I love it. I love love. Can't wait to talk about love. And it's why this is one of my favorite movies, Josh. Like I love Christopher Nolan movies. I really appreciate spectacle. I appreciate spectacle done well. Nolan is famous for his use of practical effects over CGI. And I think that CGI is sometimes used as a crutch in entertainment. So it's wonderful to see how he sort of blends modern filmmaking with sort of old school techniques. But this is the movie by Christopher Nolan that really said something and really captured an emotion. So for me, that's one of the reasons why I think this is one of his, if not the best Christopher Nolan movie. Okay, so Josh, let's start with, I think, the biggest moral question. And I start this off because you and I are both fathers. And so I think that this is the most interesting question that the film asks. Matthew McConaughey learns that there's this possible solution for saving humanity. And he, like a giddy schoolgirl, cannot wait to go on this mission. They might ask you to suspend your disbelief that he doesn't want to go. It's very clear that he wants to go. He wants to go to space. He wants to save the world. I don't think that there was much questioning in the mind of Matthew McConaughey. But there would be for me. Do you think that you could have found the strength to leave your kids in that situation and go save the world?
Boy, I mean, you're right. That is the key question. That is one of the key questions of this movie. And all things being equal, if my kids were at that age, I don't know that I could have.
I know.
There's part of me that would really want to. Now, if my kids were the age they are now, my kids are adult children, I would be like, hey, guys, I'm going to go save the planet. And they'd be like, yeah do it. Go. We'll miss you. That will suck. But
his
go.
Relationship with Timothée Chalamet was that, where he's like, I got to go. You get my truck. Wish me the best.
Cool. Good job, Dad. Go.
Yeah.
I'm going to farm this dirt for you while you're gone.
Yeah. I'm going to farm this dirt and hate on ballet dancers.
Yeah. So, that scene where he had to leave and he was saying goodbye to Murph, I thought that they glossed over the emotionality of that a little bit. I think that why did he have to leave that minute? Why did he have to leave so fast? Couldn't they have talked it out a little bit more? I mean, I get it. They wanted to make it so that they had this rupture. Certainly having him leave her at that point in her development is a serious attachment rupture, especially for a young child whose mother I assume had already died.
No, she died. She definitely died.
She died. Okay.
Yeah, because they talk about the MRI machine, and if they still had an MRI, they would have found the cancer in her brain.
Oh, I didn't remember that part.
Yeah.
So, okay.
Yeah.
Well, thanks, Jeff.
Yeah.
Thanks for clearing up that
You'd be sitting
hole
here talking to her instead of me. She was always the calmer one. That's the terrible McConaughey, but
all right.
Yeah. Had to be done. It had to be done at some point.
Yeah. So anyways, so she, that sets up for the rest of the movie the conflictual relationship that she has with her absent father, the backdrop of which provides Nolan's treatise for how love spans time and space, which I actually think is a pretty good treatise. But anywho, I don't, to answer your question, I don't, at that age with a daughter like that, I don't know that I could have left. I just don't know if I could have.
I know, because here's the question you're asking yourself is like, yes, you could save the world, but you're probably going to lose your kid. You're probably never going to see your kid again. What kind of life is that? Like, why would I want to do that? Like, I love my kids so much that if someone was like, hey, save the world or spend time with your kid, I don't know, man. It would be really hard for me to walk away from my kid. And I know that that's technically the selfish choice. is to want to stay and enjoy my kid. But you're also going to have to watch them slowly die if you stay. It's an impossible choice. And I think eventually I would have come around to making the same choice that Matthew McConaughey did. I wouldn't have reveled in it as much as he did, where he's like, yeah, I get to go to space now. All right. I mean, he's pretty jacked up about getting to go. Just watch the 2 scenes with him and John Lithgow talking on the porch. And in one, he's like, hate this place. And the other, he's like, man, I can't wait to leave this planet. Knocking back his beers. But I don't know. I think eventually I would have gotten there. I think I would have gotten there, but it would have been really hard. It would have been really hard. But ultimately, I don't want to watch my kids slowly die, and that's I think what the choice is.
Yeah, I hear you. The other thing is it's not a given he's going to save the Earth. I mean, this is a long shot. This should have been subtitled Project Hail Mary. I mean, it was a long shot. Yeah.
Josh, that just speaks to my favorite line of the whole movie. I don't know how you can not love this movie when the spaceship is spinning out of control and he's like, we're gonna dock, and everybody's like, that's impossible. He's like, nah, it's necessary. And then he just does it. I'm like, oh, I'm in. This is great cinema. No, it's necessary. Doesn't even.
Weird.
It's not impossible. It's
I
just
cannot
necessary.
believe. I mean, you and I. Our top 10 lists for favorite movies probably have 8 overlaps. I just cannot believe how dissonant you and I are on this, because I heard that line and I rolled my eyes. I'm like, oh my God.
I mean, do you like McConaughey?
Yeah, very much. One of my favorite TV shows of all time is True Detective.
Yeah. Okay, so Josh, yes or no? Do you think you would leave?
I mean, I do have a bit of a hero complex, Jeff.
Okay, I'm going to ask you a random one, Josh, and then we're going to talk about love. I don't know why this moment stuck with me, but it's so important to think about now. When Matthew McConaughey is talking to the teacher, and they're talking about Murph, and Murph has brought in one one of the old landers, and he's like, oh, yeah, the landers. And the teacher says, well, she brought in one of the old textbooks. And she says, well, we wanted to learn from the modern textbooks, which have been corrected. And Matthew McConaughey looks at her and says, you don't think that we went to the moon? And she says, I think it was a beautiful piece of propaganda to bankrupt the Russians. I think in that moment, we're all supposed to believe that we did, in fact, go to the moon, and that this lady has been lied to and been given propaganda and fed propaganda, and she believes that propaganda. It's so interesting to me, that choice, that in this world the government is giving that propaganda in order to motivate people to become farmers. And I think that there's something important about propaganda in motivating people. And you and I sort of addressed this a couple weeks ago, where we were talking about The Martian and how the truth is always the best strategy. Do you think that there is sometimes a good use for propaganda?
Propaganda doesn't necessarily mean lying. So, I mean, propaganda is just putting out the message that that the folks in power or the folks who have access to the propaganda machine want you to see. Right. Doesn't necessarily mean lying. In this case, it did. Right. And I agree with you. This was a very effective use of propaganda to set the universe of this movie, right, in which, the government is basically trying to control things so that we create enough food for everybody.
Right.
It was it was an interesting piece that they chose this, but it went along with the idea that they were going to publicly eschew NASA while privately funding him to try to get off the planet. Yeah, I mean, propaganda is really powerful, and it really works to manipulate public opinion. That's why governments use it over and over and over and over again, and always have.
Yeah,
it's why you see it now. What's really interesting today, and something that they didn't have in this movie, and I think probably because it wasn't in the zeitgeist enough yet when Nolan was making this movie, and it was released in 2014, was the role of social media. Because social media can be a really powerful tool for propaganda, but we're also finding that it is an incredibly equally powerful tool to fight official propaganda because of how difficult it is to control all aspects of social media. In fact, they're really crediting social media for Hungary's Viktor Orban's recent election loss. He was thought that he would never lose an election again because he's an autocrat that some American politicians really aspire to be like, and yet he lost an election in which he had all the cards because of social media.
I mean, good.
And because they were
I'm
able
glad
to fight the propaganda.
I'm glad there's some sort of piece of evidence out there that propaganda isn't winning, because, I mean, you and I just see propaganda spread constantly, and it's one of these things where I don't care what you believe, the facts are the facts. And there are just some things that are constantly getting spewed that are propaganda. One of the one I heard recently was that gas prices are lower now than they were, under Biden. And it's like, we can just look at the facts, and no, they're higher than they've ever been. Those are the facts. But you have all these people saying something different in this position of power, and there's no repercussions for lying. And so you get to spew this propaganda. And so here's my moral question for you, Josh. If you were just the ruler of the planet, let's say, not even the president, just the ruler of the planet, and you knew that people were going to vote for something that would end their lives, or you could lie to them and manipulate them into saving themselves, what would you do?
I really want to say that I would tell them the truth. But with the scenario that you've presented, as black and white as that is, I would probably lie to them to try to get them to save themselves. Yeah. I do have a little bit of a hero complex, so there's that. And also, but the problem, of course, is things are never really that black and white. You pose the question, can we trust people to make the best choices for themselves? In some cases, yes. When the answer is so obvious, what's the best choice for you? Is the best choice for you to play Russian roulette or not play Russian roulette? The answer is to not play Russian roulette. But the choice is rarely that black and white.
Sure.
And that's the problem.
Agreed, but it's also one of the fundamentals of social philosophy is to try and make things as black and white as possible, because you do get to some universal truths that way. And I think that the correct answer is you let humanity destroy itself, because either you value the truth or you don't. One of my favorite philosophical questions, Josh, is: would you swim in a pool with a dead body?
No.
Of course not. Of course you wouldn't. No. But you would swim in the ocean, correct?
Sure.
Okay, we know there are dead bodies in the ocean. And so the issue isn't the dead body, it's the size of the pool. And I just have always thought that was really interesting. It's the same thing in this case, where it's like, if humanity was going to hurt themselves, would you let them make the choice for themselves? Probably. And it would just depend on the amount of hurt. But at some level, we change over to, we can't let them hurt themselves this much.
Well, sure, but this is the same question that you and I and all parents have to deal with when we're looking at our children.
I was just going to say that.
There's a threshold. You let them fuck around and find out to a point.
Yeah.
I called you once. And interestingly
enough,
enough, that point shifts depending on where we're at in our lives, depending on how old the kid is, depending on societal pressures. Yeah. I mean, you and I were free-range latchkey kids.
Yeah.
And most people nowadays would say that's child abuse.
Yeah. Yeah, I called you once, like a year ago, and I was like, dude, Winsy is slamming her head against the floor to get what she wants, because she knows that if she hurts herself, I'll give in. What do I do? And you gave me the advice. You were like, look, she's not going to push herself so far that she really hurts herself. You got to just let her do it. And I did, and we got past that. She doesn't do it anymore. She stopped doing it. But for a second, I was like, God, what do I do? I can't let her hurt herself. And it's like, well, is she really hurting herself or not? And it's like, well, not really. And it's like, well, then there you go. Like, don't give into that. And I think that was the right answer. You know, you gave me great advice. But had she been really hurting herself, where all of a sudden she's like seeing stars, you know, you step in. And so there might be a time for propaganda, but it's far, far down the line of people hurting themselves. Anyway,
I rolled the dice and won on that one.
yeah. Okay, Josh, let's dive into the central theme. This movie has a great moral conundrum. We talked about it, but the central theme of this really revolves around love. And so I want to dive into love and let you have your tell us about love. But I want to mention this before we do, because it's such an interesting theme. So often, Josh, you can tell where people are in their lives by what art they make.
Sure.
Christopher Nolan, before making this movie, had just had a daughter. And so the question of this movie is, can an absentee father be forgiven by his kid?
Yes, it is. That is absolutely the central question of this movie.
And so a big-time director who's very, very busy, who's just had a kid who he probably loves with all his heart, is staring down at this thing and be like, man, are you going to forgive me when I have to work a lot? And that's how we got the movie Interstellar.
Well, that's really interesting. Yeah. It would be interesting, and I'm sure someone has done this, gone back and made a study of movies and where different directors were at different points of their life. That would be really interesting to do. I mean, I can totally see it. This is this movie is really a love poem to his daughter, and I'm all for that.
Yeah. Okay, so let's talk about love. So this movie is a lot about Christopher Nolan exploring the love that he has, for his new child, and it's clearly Christopher Nolan's treatise or thesis that love will conquer all, and that love can span dimensions. Josh, is love that powerful?
Jeff, it really might be.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, look, we've got in our language, we've got a lot of cliches about love. Love will conquer all, and the like. We don't develop cliches without there being something behind it.
Sure.
And look, this is a mental health podcast. Talking about love isn't necessarily a mental illness issue, but it underpins so much of what drives us as humans.
Right.
And here's why. Sometimes love is dismissed by science as a mere chemical accident.
Sure.
Nolan treats it as a physical dimension. I'm not going to go so far to think of it as that, but in the film, Anne Hathaway's character, Dr. Brand, famously suggests that love isn't just a social utility, that it is, quote, the one thing we're capable of perceiving that transcends dimensions of time and space. And there may actually be some truth to this. I find this to be a beautiful metaphor about the actual architecture of the human brain.
Yeah, Josh,
So-
what's interesting about that moment, too, is that the flip side of it is McConaughey saying that love helps us in the hunter-gatherer sense and has helped to, move our species along so that we can, just survive, and it's been, chemically interesting. But it's like, fuck you, dude. You came here because of the love of your daughter, and your love for your daughter is going to transcend space and time. So, you know exactly what she's talking about. Eat a bag of dicks, McConaughey. You know what she's talking about. That was one of the moments where I was like, dude, you're here for your kid. She's here for a man she loves. Stop being so goddamn judgmental. Anyway.
Right.
Please,
well,
please
I mean,
keep going.
the point there is that her love was interfering with his love.
Right.
And that's a problem. So
yeah, and unfortunately, he had a better logical argument for his love, but and she says it. She says, "I really hope you're going to be as cutthroat as you were with me when it comes down to saving your daughter."
Well, one of the difficulties for us actually applying logic to love and using logic as they tried to do to counteract the arguments that love brings up for us is that from a neurobiologic perspective, love begins in our most primitive structures. When we feel that transcendental pull towards someone, our reward system, that is our brain's internal good job stamp, is flooded with dopamine.
Okay.
That's the do it again signal that motivates us to chase a reward.
Sure.
Interestingly, as we've talked about many times, it is the same circuitry involved in addiction. So Cooper's drive to return to Murph functions like a biologic imperative. And evolutionarily, this addiction to our kin ensured our survival, as he pointed out.
Right.
We are neurochemically tethered to those we love so we don't abandon them when the dust storms of life arrive.
Yeah, and it's so interesting how evolutionarily we've changed or whatnot, and how like a lot of times babies will look like the father, and that's an evolutionary thing, so the father doesn't abandon the baby. I think that's super interesting. You said something, though, Josh, that I thought was interesting. I just want to touch on it quickly. You say in our most primitive structures, you said love begins in our most primitive structures. Are you talking about just in our DNA, or are you talking about like when an egg and a sperm meet and we start feeling love even at that level? Like, what does primitive structures mean?
Great question, Jeff. When I'm talking about our primitive structures, I'm talking about the brain structures, the parts of the brain that we find in the most unevolved mammals or creatures.
Okay. Gotcha.
So the parts of the brain that developed very early in evolutionary history, even far before you could even distinguish us as humans or apes or even mammals. So these types of attraction impulses
Right.
Exist in other animals, but we call it love.
It's so funny you say that, because like I'm a philosophy major. I've thought about, is love a real thing, or is it just a function of chemicals in our brains that help us to motivate us to do something, and our emotions just the manifestation of the chemicals? And then I think about elephants. And I think I remember just seeing an elephant that like lost its mother. There was like a baby elephant, and it just like cried and cried. And I've seen the same thing with horses. And it's like, dude, this is more than just chemical. There's something more to it than just it being a chemical thing. And then you start to get into like, is there a soul and all these things? And, and I just think we don't know enough yet to really understand what love is. And I think we're getting there. But there is something more to love than it just being a mix of chemicals in the brain. It's really hard for me to believe anything other than that, even though all the evidence points to it's just a process of evolution. It's just helpful from an evolutionary standpoint.
Well, it is and it isn't. I'm actually one that believes, like you, that it is more than the sum of its parts. But just as you pointed out, as we have evolved, interestingly, love also evolves, right?
Okay.
So beyond that initial dopamine high, chemicals like oxytocin create long-term bonds that persist even in total physical absence.
Sure.
And in Interstellar, this kind of concept plays a big role. Time dilation means that while Cooper's away for a few hours, decades pass for Murph.
Yeah.
Psychologically, this mirrors grief or long-distance separation. Because of our internal working models of people that we hold in our brains, Murph keeps a version of her father alive in her mind. And even though he's ghosting her through time,
Boom.
her neural
Boom.
boom,
Well done,
drop
well
that
done.
one. Murph's neural pathways remain wired to his frequency. Love becomes a psychological bridge across a temporal rift.
That last sentence sounded good, and if I saw it on a T-shirt, I'd be like, all right. I don't know what that means, Josh.
Love becomes a psychological bridge across a temporal rift.
Yeah. I mean, if you say that in a McConaughey accent, I'm going to be all right.
Love becomes a psychological bridge across the temporal rift. All right. Sploosh.
That brings our all right counter to about 7. We'll see how many more we get.
Okay, Jeff, in other words, love is the emotional safety line attaching people when they can't be in the same place in the same time.
Okay. So, and a little bit of that is like distance makes the heart grow fonder is an example of that.
Exactly right.
Okay. One of the places where I think people mistake this is when a parent dies or when somebody dies and we grieve. And I often think people mistake the grieving process for a lessening of love, where it's like as you grieve and as you get used to someone being dead and as you like move on with your life, you somehow love them less. And I don't think that's true. I think I love mom and dad as much as I always loved them. I've just gotten used to their not being around. And I've also really psychologically worked through, this is the way it was supposed to be, that they're supposed to die first. It's absolutely heartbreaking if a child outlives their parent. And so mom and dad, I was supposed to bury our parents. You and I were supposed to bury our parents. And even though we've moved on, and even though we mainly joke about it now, we don't love them any less. Our love has still transcended, time and space. But I think that people do think like grieving means like, oh, you kind of fall out of love, or you like, your love lessens over time. I don't think it does.
No, I don't think it does either. And I actually think that Nolan speaks to that or illustrates that pretty well in Interstellar, even though he's not talking about the death of a parent or of a child. He explains it as love being the fifth dimension. And I view that tesseract, I have a hard time using the word tesseract because that will forever be part of Marvel
tied
for
to
me.
MCU.
Yeah, but that tesseract is a metaphor for what we scientists call our limbic system. That is our brain's emotional control center. And our emotions allow us to collapse time. When you and I remember our parents who are gone, the emotional response is immediate. It doesn't care about the intervening years or whether they're dead or alive or lost or whatever.
Right.
Your brain processes that love as a present tense reality. It is real now. My love for mom and dad, your love for mom and dad, it is real right now.
Is that also why kids tend to canonize their parents after they die, and we tend to like make saints of people after they die, even though they didn't live saintly?
I think it plays a part of it. I think
because
that's
the love survives and everything else kind of falls away.
It's a very complex question. I think a lot of people do so. They either work through some of the ambiguous animosity they had towards their parents, either with therapy or just by thinking about it themselves. Right. And some of that falls away. I do know lots of people who haven't canonized their parents, and they're just evil in their head forever. So that happens too.
I actually demonized Dad for the first 10 years.
We both did for a long time.
Yeah, and then eventually, got to the point where I forgave him for what I needed to forgive him for. Mm-hmm. And now, I love him like crazy, and, I've had kids, and I'm like, Jesus Christ, Larry Jones would have been the best grandparent. He would have been exceptional. He would have loved his grandkids. He would have been their emotional rock. They would have loved Dad. They would have loved Dad. His laugh, everything about Dad would have been a perfect grandparent. And I don't have any problem thinking of him in only that way. And what does it serve me to be mad at Dad for how much of a little bitch he was when he died?
And my kids ask about him quite often, and I tell them the good things about him. In fact, my son, who was born well after Dad died, has adopted Dad's really annoying elbows pinned against the side, arms out. And Anthony does that so well. He looks just like Dad. But, Jeff, final point on the neurobiology of love is that it is in some way, it is in many ways, an evolutionarily driven process. So, love is, and it has worked as, and developed because it was the ultimate survival mechanism, right?
Right.
It forced us to look, and it forces us to look beyond our own immediate needs toward the future of the collective, or at least our little part of the collective. So this is in the story, the future humans use a father's love to ensure their own existence. And this is really the truth of psychological love. Our attachments are the gravity that holds the world together, that holds our world together. When we love, we are using our biology to touch something that outlasts our brief time on this planet.
This is a terrible thing to say, because this is going to be one of those things like does alienate some people. Man, I was all about people being able to make the decision to not have kids before I had kids. And obviously I still am like, you live your life however you want to. And if people don't want to have kids, that's fine. But holy shit, man, I could not have experienced the full weight of humanity without having children. that is a love that exists nowhere else. You know, and I remember having these arguments with mom, and well, they weren't arguments; they were just cute things that a kid would say to his mom, and mom would be like, "I love you," and I'd be like, "I love you more," and then she would say, "You're right," and whichever one of us said "I love you," we would always do that. But I always thought, like, there's no way that mom could love me as much as I love her. I obviously love mom more than she loves me. Wow, was I wrong? Wow, was I wrong? I love my kids more than I ever loved mom and dad, and I loved mom and dad a lot. You know, and now Winsy will be like, "Dad, I love you more." And I'm like, "Nah, you don't." And I don't even play the game. I'm just like, "Nope." You will never understand my love for you until you have a kid. Holy shit. The love of a father and a daughter, or a father and a son, or mother and son. Oh my God, it's so powerful. It's so powerful.
I once had a motivational speaker tell me in college. It was during a presentation, but he was talking about the love that he has for his wife versus the love that he has for his daughter. And he said that, you know, if my wife was in danger and it was my life or her life, I would absolutely give up my life for her. If it was my daughter in the same way, I would rip out my own heart out of my chest and give it to her if that's what it took. Yeah. And I'm like, yeah, that's pretty much the same way.
Yeah.
I buy that. Jeff, one final thing I want to say, you know, about your question of, or your rejection of this idea that love is really just a chemical interaction. I'm a scientist. All physicians are at our heart scientists, psychiatrists or scientists. We believe in, you know, by definition, a reductionist view of the world, trying to break things down into its smallest indivisible parts so that we can then build it back up and understand how things work. That being said, although I understand that on one level that these are all just chemical interactions that are happening in our brain, I absolutely believe, and I think we can demonstrate, that humans are much more than the sum of our parts, that humanity is much more than the sum of its individual parts, and that our emotions are much more than the sum of the interactions of the chemicals in our brain. I think the most easiest way to point this out is that if you boiled a human down into its various chemical elements, you could sell them on the on the market for about $63. Obviously, a human life is worth much more than that. Josh Jones says humans are worth $63. The rest of the clip says that we are obviously worth much more than $63 in what we, just from a pure numbers perspective, what you can produce, what you make. Obviously, that dollar amount, $63, is a ridiculous amount to put on a human life. And so that in and of itself lends support to my point that we are more than the sum of its parts, and to pretend anything differently is to try to reduce things to a point of silliness.
I do think, though, Josh, your math is a little off, because I don't think you're taking into account the closing of the Strait of Hormuz, and that has sort of raised the price of all goods. So I think that the human...
I added tariffs in. I added tariffs in, Jeff. Don't you worry.
Okay, yeah. You did factor in.
I mean, last year you could have gotten a human for $46. But you're gonna take that clip out too.
Someone's kidney is worth more than $63, Josh. Like I don't.
That's my point. That's my point. This is if you just boil us down to our elements. That's my point.
What if someone's wearing a gold ring and they get boiled down like?
Fuck off.
All right, Josh, I want to get a little nerdy about screenwriting for a second, because this is one of my top 5 favorite movies. I think that there's a lot you can learn about screenwriting from this film. And there's something about the reason why this is sort of every guy's favorite movie. It's in their top 5. I'm not alone in that. I know this isn't for you, but this is a lot of people's favorite movie. And whether or not you love it as Nolan's best movie, some people like The Dark Knight, some people like Inception. This is the one that has the most heart, and people talk about Interstellar. And if you ever watch TikTok, women will complain a lot about, like, if a guy's favorite movie is Interstellar, walk away. I could not disagree with that more, and I think that loving Interstellar says a certain thing about a guy. But what I love about this movie is that it is what I call a non-traditional love story. I don't know if that's a phrase that I coined. I don't think it is. I think it's pretty common, but I've never heard it used by anybody else before. But it's a non-traditional love story. Every movie, every single movie is in one way or another about love, because every movie is about some sort of connection. And to be a non-traditional love story is to be a non-romantic love story. And this is a great example. One of my other favorite movies, Man on Fire. It's a love story between Denzel Washington and Dakota Fanning. And he comes back from the dead, essentially, because of his love for this girl. They kidnap her, and he burns the world to the ground to get her back. It's fantastic.
Non-romantic love.
Non-romantic love. And that is a non-traditional love story. Superbad is a great example of a non-traditional love story. Yes, they have love interests, but it's not about their love. It's about the two friends and realizing that their time in high school is done and they have to move on from each other. It's a beautiful love story between two guys. And so this is a incredible non-traditional love story. And what I think is interesting about this movie was when this was originally made, or when this was originally being developed, Spielberg was originally attached. And when Spielberg was attached, this was a love story between Brandt and Cooper. So it was a love story between Matthew McConaughey and Anne Hathaway. And I don't think it would have worked as well if it had been a traditional love story. It needed to be about the father and the daughter. Thematically, it was much more interesting to do this transcendental love story between a father and a daughter than it was to be between Hathaway and McConaughey. And that's the thing that I think is really interesting about this movie. And I sort of said it earlier that Nolan was processing the love that he had for his newborn daughter. And that's where this came from. And I don't think that you saw Nolan really make a movie this powerful about a father-daughter relationship or a father-son relationship until he had gone through it himself. And he realized, like, man, this is a much more powerful love than just two astronauts falling in love. And so I just think that the important sort of screenwriting lesson here is to realize that, like, romantic love can be interesting, but it's not the most interesting. And most of the time, I would say that non-traditional love stories are far more interesting movies than just romantic love stories. And it's the reason why I love Interstellar. It speaks to who I would be as a father. It asks some very difficult questions about fatherhood. And in the end, I know you didn't love the Tesseract, Josh, but when he's like, program it into the watch, and it's like, how do you know she's going to come back for it? Because I gave it to her. And it's just like, oh, man, I just lose my shit at that moment. I just cry and cry. I love this movie, and I love a non-traditional love story. Those are by far my favorite. Wreck-It Ralph is one of my favorite Disney movies. There's no romantic relationship between Ralph and Vanellope von Schweetz. You know, it's a mentor sort of mentee. They become great friends. You know, and in the end, he sacrifices himself for her and chants the bad guy's mantra as he's falling to his death. Again, I lose my shit every time. So this is a great way to just prop up and emphasize the importance of the non-traditional love story.
I want to know more about the CGI I want to know more about CGI versus practical effects, because there was a fair amount of CGI here. And I guess from a filmmaking perspective, when does too much CGI fall into the uncanny valley? Because it didn't here. Obviously, TARS and Case were CGI. You know, when Kip was lying there in pieces, that was obviously practical effect, but they were CGI. And yet they were two of the most relatable characters, I thought, in the movie. So how do you balance that? How does Nolan balance that so effectively? And
so here's where Josh,
and where do you cross the line? Where does it cross the line?
Here's where Nolan is a genius. Here's why he's going to be known as one of the most visionary directors for a long time. Nolan future-proofs his movies. Okay? You can love a Christopher Nolan movie for a long time, more so than other directors. And it's because of his use of practical effects and his minimal use of CGI. Famously, he, in The Dark Knight, crashed a semi, and rather than do it with CGI, he's like, no, I really want to crash this thing. I really want to fully turn it over. It looks real because it is real. And 5, 6, 10 years from now, we're not going to be able to look at the CGI and be like, oh man, that doesn't look real anymore.
Sure.
So he was aware that making things look real in the moment is what is essentially future-proofing your movie. So when he has to use CGI, he makes it fucking incredible. And specifically for Interstellar, the black hole. So the black hole was so physically exact and so precise, and he got all sorts of like astrophysicists and mathematicians to help him build that black hole. And it was so precise that it took, I think, like 100 computers, something like 1,000 days to render, because it was so mathematically precise. And so 20 years from now, we're going to look at that black hole and be like, that's still really impressive. And so he uses CGI in places where and he uses it in ways that other people just can't afford to. But because of the use of practical effects and then his incredible use of CGI, his movies are going to be impressive. Now, let's look at someone who's like a director who's like, oh, I can do this right now because that technology just came out. Well, in 2 years, that's going to look dumb. Yeah. You're overusing the CGI, and it's going to almost immediately make your movie look old because the technology is going to get better. And so that's one of the reasons why I think that Nolan is so impressive. In Inception, when that room is turning, he just built a room, and that's all practical. Yeah. You know, none of that is green screen. That was just a real room, and so it's going to look real because it is real. And so that's one of the ways where I just think Nolan is next level. Is when he uses CGI, he uses the fanciest, most amazing CGI possible that will still be cool in 10 years.
Yeah. Okay, that's a really interesting breakdown. That helps a lot. So he's created a black hole special effect that was so realistic. That's why we have a black hole that now orbits Jupiter.
Correct. Yeah. Pretty much.
You know, so my son and I watched the Batman trilogy, the Nolan Batman trilogy, pretty recently. And, you know, while some of the things were dated, I mean, it was supposed to be set now and nobody has a lot of cell phones and things like that. I mean, there's just some things that were kind of retro just because we didn't know that they were going to be invented, etc. You're right, though. The whole thing looks like it could be now because it is practical effects. Yeah, that's an exceptionally good point.
You know what has survived pretty well over time, Josh? The Star Wars.
Yeah, well, the original trilogy.
Yeah, I'm saying like the original movie called Star Wars. Yeah, Star Wars: A New Hope.
Oh yeah.
Most of that was practical.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, obviously not being in space, but like they had models for the ships flying around, but they didn't have a lot of CGI, so they built.
There was
sets.
no CGI. There was no CGI. They didn't have the first. The first,
but you know what I mean,
really
like some old
generated
space films, it looks like a model kind of like bouncing across.
Look, you can see the strings, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But like Star Wars still looks great. The only reason why Star Wars looks dated is the haircuts. You know, it's like this was obviously made in the 70s. Like those are some mops, but you know, it's mainly practical effects, which you know makes that movie incredible.
The Beatles were really popular in the Outer Rim in that era, Jeff.
Exactly, Josh. We have to talk about something else when it comes to this movie, and it's another one of the moral questions. So I'm just gonna lay it out there. I want to talk about Dr. Brand's portrayal.
Yeah, sure.
Plan A and Plan B. Plan A, we figure out how to move everybody on the planet. Plan B, we've got some people in test tubes, and we'll bring them to life. And this is, again, one of those sort of propaganda moments or those is it best to lie to people? And we learn, as the movie goes on, there really wasn't a plan A because he was never going to be able to solve his equation, but he needed people to have the hope to save humanity in order to leave. And Matt Damon says it very well. He's like, you never would have left your kids if you thought that there was a chance, if you knew that they were going to die. You wouldn't choose to save humanity if you couldn't also save your kid. And I thought that that was incredibly powerful. And this is one of those moments where I think it trends more towards, when we talked earlier, would you lie if it meant saving humanity? Do you think Brand was right in lying to people about there being a plan A?
No, I don't think he was right at all. And the more I learn about this issue, Jeff, in leadership, the idea of a trust tax and a trust credit, the more I strongly am coming out on the side of radical transparency. Look, most leaders will never have such a decision as Dr. Brand did in this fictional movie. But the hidden cost of low transparency is that when it's revealed, suspicion of the leader's intentions and future decisions slows down every decision and interaction. And it just makes things worse. Whereas a trust credit, being transparent about what's really going on, acts as a performance multiplier and allows high trust teams to move faster and accomplish more with less effort. And I just think that gets borne over and over again. And even in the conceit of the movie, in the universe of the movie, he was wrong. That's the problem. He was wrong. You don't know everything. And so, I mean, even in the conceit of the movie, I think that he thought he could solve it, perhaps, because they did lay out, what must have been trillions of dollars to make a plan A. You wouldn't have done that if you didn't think it had some shot to go there. I don't know. Who knows?
I don't know. Do you think Matt Damon was right, though? Do you think that McConaughey would not have come if he knew there was no plan A? Because I think that's probably accurate.
McConaughey probably wouldn't, but somebody would have.
Yeah, but they needed the Coops. They needed a Coop on both ends.
They needed Cooper so bad that they didn't know he existed one day before launch of the mission.
Yeah, I mean, that part is true. Even though he was just like hanging around outside, he did not live far away.
Doing some farming.
Doing some
farming.
We're kind of hung up on Matthew McConaughey's love for his kids. But we also forget that Dr. Brand makes an incredible sacrifice in sending his daughter away and lying to her and saying, there is a hope for humanity, so go out and save my life. Knowing that, or believing that she's not going to be able to do it, and she's going to eventually figure out that he betrayed her, but humanity will live on. And it's an incredible lie. And whether or not you agree that it's the right thing to do, it's an incredible lie. But then what I thought is interesting is he just replaces his daughter. He's like, well, I lost my daughter, but I'll just take McConaughey's. Hey, is she interested in coming and hanging out with me? Yeah. She'll come with you. But yeah, in the end, Brand, got a daughter back. He's like, I gotta have some smart chick around, so he just steals McConaughey's daughter. You want to hear an interesting fact about the cornfields, Josh? Again, like the not using CGI.
I do. Yeah, tell me.
So Nolan bought those fields, planted all that corn, so that he could drive through it realistically, and then in the end, sold the corn at a profit.
Oh, it's amazing.
But again, those cornfield chases are so awesome because they're real. No part of that is CGI. Like he did it practically. And Nolan's to me is just an incredible filmmaker.
You got your non-GMO corn. You got your non-CGI corn. That's just corn, brother.
This is straight corn. There's a line somewhere in the movie where he's like, that's the last harvest of okra ever. And I'm like, I don't think I've ever had okra. I think that's not that big of a loss. It's like, should have planted corn like the rest of us. I'm like, yeah.
I wanted McConaughey so badly to say that, to be like, well, it's okra.
Yeah.
Gives a shit.
Okay.
Also, they had 3 crops. Apparently the world has 3 crops: wheat, okra, and corn.
So, Josh, I was thinking about what to do for our top 5 this week, and I thought of something that Spielberg said, which when Christopher Nolan took over for him for Interstellar, He said, this was a great idea. He made a movie that I could not have made. He was the right director for this. And I thought about it. I was like, there's a lot of other movies where I feel like a different director would have done a better job. And so our top 5 list this week is my list of 5 films that would have been better if someone else had been at the helm.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Obviously, a lot of very subjectiveness to this list, but I can't wait to hear it. Do you have any honorable mentions this week?
The honorable mention is going to be by far the most controversial.
Okay.
So I am in the minority with this, and I understand it, but I didn't love Barbie as much as everybody else did. I think that Greta Gerwig is an amazing writer, and I think she's a very good director. But I do think that in a way, this movie was pretty forgettable. And if you actually look at the data, Barbie did better than Oppenheimer originally, but Oppenheimer is doing better now. And I felt at the time like this was a really beautiful movie that I was never going to watch again. And so I think it just could have been a lot more visually interesting. And it felt really heavy-handed, and kind of the message was kind of jammed down our throat. And so it would have been really interesting had it been directed by someone like Edgar Wright, who is very playful with sets and transitions and does a much better job with the visual style than I think Greta Gerwig does. But I don't think you could have Edgar Wright direct this movie. I think this movie had to be directed by a woman. And I think Lynn Ramsey would have been a better choice.
Okay.
So she just directed Die My Love with Jennifer Lawrence and Robert Pattinson. She directed We Need to Talk About Kevin, You Were Never Really Here. She's known for visual storytelling and psychological intensity. Again, Barbie worked because it was broad and accessible, but Ramsey's strength is that she doesn't explain, she shows. And if you have a movie written by Gerwig and then directed by Lynn, I think it would have been way more powerful, and it would have been more of a movie that we would continue to watch generation to generation. But I do think that Barbie's going to kind of come and go, and future generations aren't going to watch it the way that they could have had someone else been at the helm. So Lynn Ramsey should have been the director of Barbie.
Okay. Interesting. Great take, Jeff. All right, number 5 on your actual list.
So number 5, we're going to go with Passengers. Passengers was a weird love story.
Yes, it was.
Yeah, it was a movie about a guy who essentially kills Jennifer Lawrence. A couple of Jennifer Lawrence movies being mentioned right off the bat. Denis Villeneuve did Arrival. He did Blade Runner 2049. He did 2049. He did Dune. He's already proven he can take big sci-fi and make it feel intimate and serious. And the biggest issue with Passengers is that it treats a morally disturbing premise like a light romance. Yeah. Villeneuve would not let that slide. He would lean into the isolation, the ethical problem of waking someone without their consent. You get a lot less quippy banter. And this could have been a really, really powerful movie, and I think it would have fixed it. And obviously, Denis Villeneuve could be the answer to all of these movies because he's such an amazing director. But specifically Passengers, I think he would have been a far better choice.
Jeff, for folks who don't have Passengers right at the tip of their brain, remind us what that movie was.
Yeah, so it was basically a spaceship is being sent something like 100 years. They're on a 100-year journey to some planet, and Chris Pratt accidentally gets woken up, and he has to deal with the isolation of being the only person awake. And so he decides to wake up Jennifer Lawrence, pretend that it was an accident, and then she finds out that he, woke her on purpose. And so it's a much more interesting movie if it's from Jennifer Lawrence's perspective as the person getting woken than it is from Chris Pratt's perspective. And that was sort of the criticism of it at the time.
And way too many light rom-com hijinks ensue.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And it gets dark towards the end. And if it had that tone the whole time, it would have been a better film.
Okay. All right. Number 4.
So number 4 could easily be number 1, but I'm going to go with Star Wars Episode 1. And it should have been directed by Steven Spielberg. Spielberg obviously made E.T., Jurassic Park, Raiders of the Lost Ark. He just understands wonder and character better than almost anyone. Star Wars Episode 1 struggled because it was just emotionally flat, especially with Anakin. Lucas paid way too much attention to the cool stuff that they could do and not enough attention to the emotional arc. They were best buddies. This is an obvious one. Episodes 1 through 3 could have probably made a case for being better than 4, 5, and 6 had Spielberg been at the helm, because I think the content was there. The story was there. Just all the elements of directing that Lucas wasn't good at would have been made better by Spielberg. And so that's my number 4.
Yeah, no, great call, Jeff. Okay, number 3.
So number 3, we're going to go with The Dark Knight Rises. That's right. Christopher Nolan getting the boot. And I understand that this was a trilogy, but I do think that Christopher Nolan completely kind of shot his wad after The Dark Knight. And The Dark Knight Rises could have been done by somebody else, and I think it would have been better done by Catherine Bigelow. Catherine Bigelow directed The Hurt Locker. She did Zero Dark 30. She did Point Break, one of my 5 favorite films. She's really good at tension and realism. The Dark Knight Rises gets big and a little messy, especially in the third act.
Sure.
Bigelow would have grounded it. Gotham feels more like a real city under siege. The action feels more immediate and less stylized. Bane becomes less theatrical and more unpredictable. That shift, treating the story like a real-world crisis instead of as comic book as it was, I think would have tightened that whole movie. I think Nolan was the right guy for The Dark Knight. Bigelow would have been the right person for Dark Knight Rises.
But would Bigelow have kept the Bane voice? Because that voice, to me, made the whole movie and so many memes since.
I don't think that was Nolan's choice. I think Tom Hardy was like, this is what I'm doing. Fuck off.
I love it.
Recast me or let me do it, but get out of my way.
Love everything about it. Okay, all right. Number 2, Jeff.
All right, number 2, we're going to go with the Hobbit trilogy. Let's get Peter Jackson out of there. He was too tired, and let's plug in Guillermo del Toro. And this one's a little bit of cheating, by the way, because I actually think Guillermo was slated to direct the Hobbit trilogy, and then he fell out for some reason. And a lot of these people just might not have been available to direct the movie at the time, blah, blah, blah. But Guillermo del Toro did Pan's Labyrinth. He did The Shape of Water. He's got Crimson Peak under his belt, so he lives in the fairy tale sort of monster space. And the problem with the Hobbit trilogy is that it feels stretched and totally confused. Del Toro's big strength is that he treats fantasy like folklore, not spectacle. So instead of 3 bloated movies, you probably get something more contained, more tactile, and way more visually distinct. The dwarves feel like mythological beings instead of these really terrible CGI characters. That one shift, making it feel like a story passed down instead of a franchise extension, would change everything. So Guillermo, you should have done The Hobbit.
Interesting. Yeah, I can see that. Yeah, I can see that. Would have been a little weirder, that's for sure. But
Yeah.
I could definitely say. Okay, so Jeff, what's your number 1 movie that you think might have been better had it been directed by somebody else?
Okay, so Peter Jackson's out of a job with The Hobbit, which frees him up to do The Last Airbender. Man, The Last Airbender is such a beloved story. And what the hell were they thinking, giving that to M. Night Shyamalan?
That's the twist, Jeff. That was the twist.
That was the twist. So obviously, Jackson directed The Lord of the Rings. So we know he can handle ensemble fantasy with clear stakes. The issue with The Last Airbender is that it rushes everything, and it didn't build the world or the characters. Give this 3 films. Jackson's strength is his patience. To the death of the Hobbit. He lets moments breathe and builds cultures that feel lived in, so bending feels grounded. The world would feel real, and the characters would actually have some arcs. That one change, slowing down and letting the story build, would make it feel like an epic instead of what we got, which was a summary. So that's it. Those are my top 5 films that would have been better in the hands of a different director.
Yeah, that's really good. I mean, The Last Airbender, instead of a 2-hour movie, could have been 3 3-hour movies. You know, a lot of times you'd say, "Oh, come on," but you know, I can see that with that. That's a lot of lore there that they tried to pack into that movie, and it was unlocked.
Anyone's jumped to the top of your head that I missed, Josh?
Oh, well, Jeff, you know the space so much better than me in terms of what would be better directed. I think any one of the Star Wars movies that George Lucas, who I love as a filmmaker but not as a director, could have been better with a different director. I think that's for sure. But no, I think this is a very comprehensive list, man.
I also think there's a lot to be said for Solo had the wrong directors. They fired them, and Ron Howard stepped in.
Yep.
The only one I think that they really got right was Rogue One. The director for Rogue One was amazing. But imagine if you had given these new 3 Star Wars movies, 7, 8, and 9, to Denis Villeneuve. To one director and let them do their thing with it. Sure. Abrams was not the right call.
Sure.
We could do a whole top 5 just on the most recent Star Wars films.
Sure.
One
movie that I wish would get made, and I don't think it is ever going to get made, was the long rumored Star Trek movie directed by Quentin Tarantino.
Oh,
that would have been incredible. Doesn't look like that's ever going to get made, but man, what a fantasy team up that would be.
It would be interesting. It would certainly be interesting. I don't necessarily see it because Tarantino's so known for just long dialogue-driven scenes. So I don't know why I would want that in a Star Trek movie, but I've also loved every single Quentin Tarantino movie. What the hell do I know? Although I thought Hateful Eight was boring. I'll be honest.
That was the one I actually didn't make it through that, but I can see an incredibly like a sarcastically long elevator ride conversation in the Star Trek elevator written by Tarantino.
Sure.
It would be like, how many levels are we going up here? Don't worry about it.
There you go.
Oh,
I mean,
Jeff,
a Kill
great
Bill
list,
Star
Jeff.
Wars crossover would be awesome. Let's watch Uma Thurman hack up some bitches with a lightsaber. That would be awesome.
Oh, Jeff, great list. Loved it.
Thank you. Thank you, Josh, for watching Interstellar again. I know it's not your favorite movie. I've wanted to cover it since we started this podcast, since it's obviously in my top 5. We talked a lot about love. Do you have any parting thoughts for us about either mental health or what we talked about when it comes to love or anything thematic? I would love to hear it.
Jeff, I think Nolan had a lot to say about non-romantic love. And I think a lot of it really resonates with some of our understanding of the biology and the evolutionary nature of love, that it is very protective, but it is also more than the sum of its parts. I think, whether you're in the mental health space, the filmmaking space, the philosophy space, everybody is trying to answer the question, what is love? Baby, don't hurt me.
Oh, my God.
Don't hurt me no more.
I can't believe you went there. All right. We're going to end with that silliness. All right. Thanks, as always, for watching or listening to Cinemental and our coverage of Interstellar. Cinemental is produced by me, Jeff Jones, and edited by David Haverty. Josh Jones is very proud of himself right now. If you like this episode, please subscribe anywhere you get your podcasts. You can also watch clips of Cinemental on YouTube, where we would love to hear what you would like us to cover next. You can also watch my companion series, The One Thing, where I take a deeper dive into screenwriting, both available on the Larger in Charge channel on YouTube. Actually, that's not true anymore. We spun off Cinemental, and so Cinemental, the podcast, is on its own channel called Cinemental. So that's where you can watch that. You can find Dr. Jones on Ask Jeeves or by following him on MySpace. This has been a Large and in Charge production in association with PMC Media. For Dr. Josh Jones, I am Jeff Jones, and we will see you next week.
I want you to hit me as hard as you can.